we're ecstatic today to have Tymofiy Mylovanov, who is the president of the Kyiv School of Economics. He's a native son of Ukraine. So just to hit the highlights, got his PhD at Wisconsin with Larry Samuelson, I think, and is now has a job at the University of Pittsburgh. He's an accomplished economic theorist with a paper, for example, in Econometrica. For those of you who aren't economists, a technical and highly prestigious economics outlet. He's kept strong ties with the Ukraine. I am with Pittsburgh. If I understand correctly from what I was reading, he's has continued to teach classes at Pittsburgh from Ukraine. Marcus Aurelius is said to represent the philosopher king of Plato. Tymofiy achieves a modern synthesis, published in Econometrica, and be for a while at least a minister in the Zelensky government and remain the president of the KSE during war. The all-encompassing title of Tymofi's talk is Military and Economic Aspects of the War in Ukraine. And this generality is entirely deliberate, so we can talk about anything that he likes and we like. Take it away, Tymofiy, and thanks very much for doing this.
Thank you. So, I don't know how to do a conversation like that, really. I've been thinking a little bit about how to do it. And I think, the largest value is coming from me being both an economist and being in Ukraine during a major war and talking to people, including students and alumni who are in the war theater. And at the same time, being engaged in humanitarian effort, providing supplies to the front lines and to the affected regions, and working with the government on the analytics of the war and seeing how the design of sanctions, sort of the economic warfare, evolves. And I can share a couple of frameworks or perspectives that I have gotten to see and to accept during this time. Maybe I'll mention three, and then perhaps the most efficient way is to do a Q&A where you ask just questions, and I'll try to be as academic and as human as possible in response to those questions. And those questions could be range from something on the GDP to as specific as how are students doing, or what happened with the Snake Island in south of Odessa 2 days ago. Any questions? I'm probably pretty informed about the economics part and somewhat informed about the military stuff, and pretty well informed about the humanitarian aspect, how people cope and what really is happening. So I'll start with one point, and I think it's an economic one. I think being in politics or being in the war, you can construct any narrative you want. So in that sense, as an economist, I know models like cheap talk, and then maybe Bayesian persuasion and signaling. And these all models have to do with with the situation where one party is informed, trying to persuade the other party or communicate with the other party. And then there are different frameworks and environments for this. But in practice, I think, if you look at Putin or if you look at Zelensky, they are less informed in many ways than people who are on the ground. And yet they are shaping the narratives, and they're quite successful. Zelensky is great at shaping the international narrative, whereas Putin is surprisingly unsuccessful in shaping this time the international narrative. Yet he was very successful in 2014 and 2008 with Georgia and in Ukraine and Crimea in 2014 to convince the world that this is an isolated local conflict, maybe even civil war. And for a long time, it wasn't common knowledge that Russian troops have been engaged in Crimea, even in the east of Ukraine. And I remember even 2016, 2017, giving talks in LSE and elsewhere, trying to argue, presenting evidence that this is not a civil war in Ukraine. It's really troops. There are troops on the ground, and people were saying no, there are no troops. So, and there's a huge surprise that Putin has failed this time to shape the international narrative, and the US was in the driver's seat for the time. For a long time, the US has been reactive, I think, in these conflicts, but this time it was since October, was pumping up the narrative that Russia will attack. And I think we're in the world where we should think about communications and persuasion models where facts don't matter, and there are politicians. It's just the position of power. They manage to convince people, and they are not convincing people they're not trying to change their beliefs. They're trying to. It's not about beliefs. Beliefs are in many ways are fixed. Maybe, I don't know, but they really are successful at communicating action or inaction. And so people are, I think that's what I've learned in this war, that the wars are the wars of symbols, and they are won by communication in as much as by kinetic warfare. But at the same time, these wars are, have nothing to do with the truth. So that's one thing. The second aspect that I've learned, and that one I've learned when I came on the bombardment the first day, in my home city, in my native town in Kyiv, when I woke up at 4 or 5 a.m. because the city was, there were missiles landing in the city. I think there are aspects that you have to experience. You cannot learn them. You really, you cannot study them. You have to experience them. It's really difficult to explain what the war is unless you wake up and there is a missile landed next to you, or unless you're driving in a village where your sister has a house and you have always been like you have half of your life connected to that village, and then when you enter in the village there are jets flying low over you. So I think that's the second one. I think the insight here is that you really have to experience certain things you can't understand. And that's why for me, Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq were really abstract things. And I didn't realize what was happening there, and I probably will never realize because I was not a part of that. I was trying to logically or rationally think about it based on my experience, but my experience is irrelevant. It doesn't help me understand interpret the environment properly. So therefore, then I usually in those environments which I haven't experienced, I try to cope and average it out with other environments and say, oh, the truth might be somewhere in between. In the war, there are two sides, there are evil and good people on both sides, something like that. It's actually not like that. It's much more black and white, and there are specific actors with specific actions. And they are on both sides, yes, but on both sides there are evil people, not evil, and there's perpetrator, and there's something very specific, and it's a responsibility to figure this out. And I never took it with respect to other conflicts because I was intellectually lazy and because I didn't experience it. And the third, I think, framework is that the way you experience things is very limited in an environment like that. There are three things that you believe in a war. One is eyewitness accounts. So if someone tells you, either you see it yourself or someone tells you that you have a first-hand eyewitness account, someone tells you that they have seen it, then you trust it. I don't know why. They might lie, but if they say they have seen it, you trust it. If they say they have heard it from someone who they have seen it, you don't trust that anymore. So you really have to talk to people. The true information and the interest towards the information comes from people who have seen it. The second one is you need to have video and photo evidence. That's the second. If you have a lot of video evidence, then you kind of believe it, even if it's manufactured, even if it's deep fakes or something like that. And the third one is Western media. I don't know why, but if it's sufficiently covered by the Western media, by the New York Times, by Washington Post, by Wall Street Journal, by the Economist, by Financial Times, by CNN, by BBC, that somehow becomes the truth, even if the facts are different. So there are three sources of information in war a person like me trusts: eyewitness accounts, video evidence, and media coverage. What it means that I don't trust data. And it's really strange for me as an academic that I don't trust data. It's because I feel that the data is too abstract, it's collected in a certain way and really doesn't capture what's the, it's like I don't have the context to interpret the data. So the data becomes irrelevant for me. For data to be interpreted, I need to have a stable context. In the war, I don't have a stable context. So the rational argument, the existing models, everything that I rely on as an academic, that becomes in many ways irrelevant because I have difficulty understanding whether those frameworks are still, whether there has been a structural break or not. I think that's I'm trying to find a way. So maybe I'll move the car so the sun is not affecting me as much. And I think this is the kind of the main insight for me that is I cannot trust anything I know in war. And the only thing I can trust is that what I have experienced personally or what someone who has experienced told me. And I think that's the key insight for me in the war. And I also learned that everything I knew before was a little bit abstract to me, and that's why I ignored the kind of what was happening in other wars and such. And I'm a little bit ashamed. So I ask everyone to, I don't know if it's much better, but maybe at least, yeah. So I will see. I don't know. I'm trying here, but I think the point is that I ask you not to be as intellectually lazy as I have been, because I kind of relied on the existing narratives and I never cared to pay attention and to figure out what was truly happening. And therefore things were abstract to me and I just followed what everyone was saying. In war, it's kind of very different and it's very, very easy to become misled. So I don't know if it's helpful, but I think this is where I want to stop, and maybe you guys ask me specific questions, because it's been 3 months, it's a blur, and I've been in like 70 talks like that, and it will be much more interactive. If you ask me a specific question, I'll try to be short, concise, and to the point.
So Timothy, a question that's sort of historical interest, but also interest looking ahead, is how much of this is due to Putin personally? That is, it seems that he had some, that of course he had control over whether the war started or not. And that's interesting because would some other leader of Russia, who, I don't know who that would be, but who'd been there instead of him, done the same thing? Is it really Russia or is it really Putin? And the looking ahead aspect of that is, suppose Putin were to die, he doesn't seem well, or suppose that he's taken out of action somehow by people in the Kremlin, what's going to happen next? How big an effect is that going to have on the war if he's gone?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think the parallel question is how big of the resilience in Ukraine is attributed to Ukraine versus to Zelensky. It's a mirror question, and we should be thinking about it because one argument was like we all, the entire world, studied Russia, and somehow we always think in the narrative Russia versus everything else, and then it's really we have missed that around Russia there are all these developments from Chechnya to Georgia to Ukraine to Poland to Belarus to you name it. It's all kind of, it's much more complex, it's heterogeneous, and it's a very, Russia has been trying to be very culturally imperialistic about it, shaping and successfully doing it internationally, the narrative that's Russia versus the West, It's not Russia versus the West. There are a lot of things going on. It's a lot of little nations still relying, trying to get out of this Soviet Union imperialism. And it's still that the capitalism somehow is attractive and is threatening. That that I think answers the question indirectly. Are these leaders? I think not. I think these are people, and it's really sad for me to understand that, because I was hoping this is just Putin and maybe 5,000 people around Putin, political elites. But I now think it's like 60 million people, 80 million out of 140 of Russians who are truly behind that. Because, at this point, there is support for the war. It's paradoxical. People don't admit there is a war and they support it, in Russia. Okay, they say there's no war, we're not even talking about the war. But at the same time, they support whatever is happening in Ukraine. And there is enough evidence inside, just because so many people are involved, right? So many people are involved in the war. So they're talking first-hand accounts, right? Eyewitness accounts. They're talking to their relatives. There are all these intercepted discussions where people talking about, soldiers are discussing atrocities and war crimes they committed. And it doesn't cause any outrage. It's thousands of people who were murdered during the villages, moving there are all these videos of tanks and machines in cars packed with ridiculous stuff they were taken from Ukrainian villages. So it's massive, it's like tribal, these are raiders, is it a leadership? Yes, but I think it's the people who accept the notion that you can take the property of others and the life of others by force. And it's not just leaders anymore. Leaders lead into this, but the people support and make it possible or enable it. So unfortunately for all of us, for the humans, for humanity, I think I hoped we left that in the 20th century. But now we have, 80 million people east of Europe believing that there is the right of force, they can use force to kill others, to take land and to take property. So, I think it's the people, not the leaders.
Of course, there is a kind of rally around the flag effect, right? Once you start a war, people are going to be patriotic about it.
Yeah, but that's different from from mass rapes and mass graves and systemic extrajudicial executions. It's one thing to fight. Like, I rally behind my president, but there are limits to where I will go. I've been in the government. And I've seen our government under this president and the previous president, top officials, having an opinion and not do, for example, multiple times there has been attempts to demilitarize Ukraine during the last 8 years. And that never went anywhere, because no matter what agreement you do, the government and the officers and the generals, they simply don't meet it. They say, no, it's not happening. Because it's it might be optimal, politicians might have agreed to something, but that doesn't matter because we have to protect our country. And so we're not doing it, So I think, and it's the other way around, if you give an order that you can pillage, the villages, you can quit, you still have a choice to get in that tank or not, when you're Russian. And you make that choice. So I think, there is a rally effect, but it's different from being inhuman, Someone gives orders to bomb kindergartens, and someone does that and they know what they're doing, because it's not isolated incidents. They know what they're bombing.
Sad, yeah. So Brian wanted to ask a question.
So, yeah, thank you. So my sort of mental model of this is kind of an economy question. My mental model of what would be going on economically in Ukraine is kind of based on my experience of the first couple months of COVID, right? Where certain industries just flat out shut down, certain kinds of activity just flat out shut down, certain kinds of activities became dramatically larger and more important, and all hands on deck, and then some things just went on as normal. So in your understanding, what is in the Ukrainian economy, right, involves a lot of agriculture and a lot of manufacturing, is my understanding. And so what's your perception of how economic activity is continuing or not continuing?
So let me ask this question: why is that? How should we think about the economy during war? Okay. So the issue with the pandemic was that the pandemic hit the entire world. It didn't hit one country or two countries in an isolated way. And it was not something of choice, right? It wasn't something that you could stop, and it wasn't something that you should mobilize. You should mobilize medically, but it was like, it was an uncontrollable virus which would spread around the world. So everyone was in the same boat. Here, the logic is very different. You have a small country, small economy, 10 times less than the economy of Russia. Russian economy nominal GDP is $1.7 trillion. Ukrainian economy is $180 billion, 2021 number. So, you have one large economy attacking the other one and destroying it militarily and economically. And the world responds essentially by, the way it's like the analogy, Paul Krugman put forward the following analogy. It's the Great Britain during the World War II, before the US formally entered in the war. So essentially you have a small country which is being attacked and bombed and fully supported or very much supported by the rest of the world. And Russia economy is 10 times larger than Ukrainian one, but it's maybe, I don't know, times less than the European one and the US one. It's as large, slightly smaller than Italy. So that's the economy. It's top 8 or 9, something like that, the economy in the world. It's large, but it's not huge. And during the war, I think what is important is mobilization. So you get logistics right, and you can get that support, you get supply lines right, and you can get that support mobilized politically, delivered logistically, and distributed efficiently to where it's needed. So I think that's the economy. You basically have a very different economy. You switch on and switch off. In many ways, it doesn't matter what's going to happen to agriculture or to manufacturing. It really does not for Ukraine. Because if Ukraine cannot, be paid well, cannot export, and so anyway, it either has to print money domestically, or it has to borrow, or it has to receive grants, which it will. Now, if you even worry about the standard monetary effects of inflation, printing money domestically, that also doesn't matter, because really the way the economy works is that it's almost like the common economy. You have limited supplies and you do rationing and you control the prices. So the price mechanism doesn't use it as usual. There's no price discovery or information aggregation through the pricing. It's not aggregating anything anymore during the war. It's the government aggregating, deciding strategically where the resources should go. So it's a common economy, really. There is some market economy in services and outside of this. Now, the world is affected, because if you have food security and Ukraine has been a competitive player undercutting the pricing from Russia, then you have a problem with North Africa, with Egypt, with Yemen, even with Pakistan, some Asian countries, North Africa, Middle East, where now Russia has a better ability to destabilize politically through the food prices increasing and putting pressure on the government. So it has leverage. But again, it's also a strategic argument. So in that sense, I think industries, of course, are hit, metallurgy in particular, but everything comes down to logistics and to supply chains, yes.
And does the government control logistics? I mean, is it checkpoints, or is it the government is the only ones operating trucks and things like that? I mean, I don't have a good understanding.
No. So the okay. So think of the useful way for me to think about the economy is that there are three types of economy. There's front lines, which is military economy, where everything is, even baker, even bakery you would mobilize potentially, okay, because it's a warfare. People are shooting, no one wants to be there if they can avoid it, or they want to be there but they want to fight, so it's a very difficult. It's a military economy. Then you have the normal economy. It's kind of central and western Ukraine. Normal in the sense that it still get bombarded, but more or less, it's market economy. And somewhere in the middle, you have close to not quite front, but could potentially become a front line. So there it's a mixture where the critical functions are taken over by the government and the rest is a still market economy. Now, logistics is private. The government is running railroads, so that's government controlled. Checkpoints are government controlled, but you are allowed to, trucks are allowed to go, through, unless in the front lines. And everything comes down to gas then, to diesel. And the government decides who is allowed to have diesel or not. So you basically, there are lists and resolutions of the cabinet of ministers. Two things are allowed. You have to get on the resolution to buy certain things for critical import. So essentially you should, there are capital controls during the war. So to bypass capital controls, you have to be on the list, or you have to be buying critical import. Or the same for fuel. You have to be on the critical, police, paramedics, fire brigades, military, trucks, food, groceries, those are allowed to public transportation. Those are allowed to have quotas, so allowed to get unlimited amount of gas. So that's how the government controls. So you basically I have to stand in the line, and I spend 40 minutes there getting 3 gallons of gas, or 2 gallons of gas in my car. But trucks were just without any lines getting full tanks, and those would be food, grocery store trucks. It's still private, but you have to get permits from the government, or you have to get on the list. So it's a hybrid system.
Okay, thank you.
Greg has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering whether you agree with the following view of it. If I think about this as a war of attrition that could potentially go on for a while, and I focus on weapons rather than people, then I start to think the Russians are limited to whatever weaponry they can produce domestically. And at least on the high-tech side, the sanctions might eventually limit their ability to produce a lot of high-tech weapons. Ukraine, on the other hand, has potentially unlimited access to high-tech weapons from the West. And so that kind of suggests to me that in the long run, if it's a war of attrition and it's mainly about weapons, that Ukraine must win. Do you agree with that?
Yes, as a framework, yes. So let's look at this framework in a little bit. Yeah, I agree with that. Let's look at from the strategic perspective. I think there are 3 players. I'm extremely simplifying. There's Russia, Ukraine, and the West. Russia is committed, Ukraine is committed. The open question is how committed the West is. So in that sense, yes, as long as the weapons are coming in, and if you ignore people, then this approach is correct. The question for me is, will the weapons keep coming long enough? Okay.
Yep.
And it's an open question. Everyone is saying it will, and unclear. Okay.
Yeah.
I very much hope it's the case, and but politicians tend to be myopic because of political cycles, and they should have done the same level of sanctions in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia, and we wouldn't have 2014 Crimea, and we wouldn't have 2022 Ukraine. But everyone wanted to postpone that in 2008, so it could be the same here. We will run out of steam in the community. So that's one thing. then on the people side, so I think the people side is the war is really about control of territory. It's surprising. 2022, the 21st century, it's really somehow, what is missing in this discussion, somehow we would think ex ante that it's about diplomacy, it's about communication, it's about cyberspace, right? It should be about, in 2022, the war should be about cyberspace, really, jamming the equipment, high tech, things like that, right? It's not. It is still about geography. It's still about crossing a river. It's still about taking a village. And somehow we don't even see, everyone was saying, Russia will overwhelm Ukraine and the West in cyberspace, or maybe something else will happen. Yeah, that is happening. There's a cyber warfare, but it somehow is not critical for anything. And this is, I think, is a big surprise, and not enough attention is being paid to it. So it's still about people, really. It's still about a soldier taking a specific building, a house, a small house, it could be a destroyed house. It's like, I don't know, 5 meters by 5 meters, like small, and it still matters. And so after all these precision weapons, after all this artillery, after all these drones, high tech, sophisticated systems of information aggregation, AI, identifying soldiers and their capacity, models, putting coefficients, on different types of troops and morale and everything. In the end, it's the people who move in the village, and it's hour by hour. Look at Azovstal and Mariupol. You still have the 1,000 fighters there in a plant, and somehow it matters. Russia, I would have thought they would ignore this. They would surround this Azovstal and say, guys, die there in 5 months. We don't care. Just no water, no food, when you already come out, surrender. But we have taken the town,
Yeah.
No, somehow Azovstal is critical. And everyone is fighting over Azovstal, and even Putin didn't declare victory in Mariupol because of Azovstal, because in some plant, in some factory, there's still 1,000 fighters in 500,000 people town, I don't know, there's something fundamental about people. And this Snake Island, you can bomb the hell out of it, they're doing. And it's a little piece of land, It's less than, I think it's maybe a football stadium or something, maybe 2, I don't know, something like that. And they keep attacking it and keep trying to put a flag on it. It really matters. And it's like 2 people died, and the other 2. So I don't know. So there's that theory. And then in terms of weapons, Russia, I think, has been sanctioned in 2014. So it cannot get high precision weapons. So technology, chips, semiconductors, and other things. So they have replaced them as much as they can. And they need some silicon and some element, and those things are available on the black market. So they will be able to smuggle in enough so that they can continue to have that kind, in my view, that might be a wrong view or maybe non-mainstream, but my suspicion is that they can continue to produce those missiles and other things, but they're already not very precise. Because I know of an attack, let's say on Lviv, they were trying to target a really important intersection. It was 2 weeks ago. Missile came in, high precision missile, 20 meters off. Mm-hmm. And they either don't have intelligence or capacity to send a second missile to fix it. It's been, they have been not very good at using high precision weapons. So they don't have high precision weapons. They will be able to, I would call them semi-high precision weapons. They'll continue to be able to support them. Ukraine has not yet fully received the Western military supports. This is in the news that it has received. Some of it is in, but it's not in Ukraine yet. So high precision artillery is not in Ukraine. It will be probably early June. People have to be trained. And so in that sense, you think of this as a liquidity constraint. If the way the West sends support is in waves. It's not continuous. They have first bunch coming in, and then there is a gap. And during this gap, Russia can potentially win. So it's because the politics works in batches, in bills. There's $30 billion or 39 appropriation. They ship it, and then there is a pause. And Ukraine has to use it and then report back. And then the West will start voting on another bill. So it comes in waves, and during the slow waves, if Russia is strategically using this, it can actually have gains. So the idea, your framework is correct fundamentally, but it's stochastic. So it doesn't mean that it will be, it will happen that way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I understand. Thanks.
Alex has a question.
Thank you. Going back to the politics, so what was the impression of Ukrainian people and also maybe people in the government you talked to, with how the other European countries' attitude toward Ukraine and toward helping Ukraine has been? I mean, there's a lot in the newspapers about Germany, France being, not playing along as much as, let's say, UK and US, and also some Eastern European countries expressing some doubts. Was that expected, or did EU and or all the other European countries did more than expected, if you will, or less than expected?
So it's in that sense there are no surprises. I think we think that, or many of us think that Russia has been able to corrupt a lot of German industry people and some of the politicians, through payroll, engaging them in the boards and who knows what, So they're trying to balance it out, and but they have been moving a lot under the pressure of people. Hungary is also no surprise because we have always felt the threat coming from the West as well. We even, I've seen classified documents where it's considered to be a risk that there will be separatism instigated by Hungary as well. So Hungary is no surprise. France also is no surprise. So in that sense, you can see that Zelensky, in fact, over the last over the time of his presidency, since 2019, he has changed from the previous president's strategy. The Poroshenko strategy was to use Germany and France to negotiate with Russia and to have, let's say, Merkel and others to broker deals with Russia on the east of Ukraine. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, they were all brokered by politicians, and Poroshenko was working with them. Zelensky changed this, and he didn't really make it very obvious, but he put much more emphasis on the UK, on Poland, and on Turkey, and on the Baltic countries. And strategically, all of them, so the UK is sufficiently far and less dependent on Russia for energy. And the Baltic, Poland, and Turkey are as scared by Russia, as threatened, as Ukraine is. Because what Russia is trying to do is not trying to just get Ukraine. It's trying to secure the control over the Eastern Europe from the Baltics to Bosphorus. Explicitly or maybe indirectly. But so the most southern country for them is Turkey, and the northeast is Estonia. So this entire stretch is up for grabs, at least in terms of influence of Russia. Russia needs access to the Baltic Sea and to the Black Sea, and as long as Turkey controls Bosphorus, Russia will not be able to freely move. So Russia will be working to impose influence on Turkey. And the same with Baltics because they have Kaliningrad there, and so it's a launch pad for them. So I think all these countries, and Romania is also in that side because of Moldova. So I think there are no surprises for us, but it could be surprises for everyone. And I think Germany and France they have been losing a lot of political capital in Europe during this war. They're really losing, and the price will come later. And it's that like Central European countries will be not reverent to Germany.
Thank you.
Hi, Timothy. So I have a question I want to come back to the informational warfare aspect of this, given our mutual research interests. So on the Ukrainian side, I was wondering if you think, how much you think that Ukraine's success at the informational warfare internationally was due to Zelensky personally. We all remember his poignant video at the beginning of the war where he said, I'm here, my minister, and he was surrounded by people. We're all here. And how much you think that, if you had an alternative president with a different background, who's maybe not as good as telling a story as he is, that it would have been the same, because he would have been, built up by the international media, like the CNN and the New York Times. And on the Russian side, I was wondering if you think Russia's lack of success at shaping the narrative this time is due to, it might be as simple as the volume of information, like their operations just can't withstand the sheer volume of reporting by the major outlets of the West, or if it's something about the subject matter, like, it's nobody has some sort of ideological belief about a virus. So if Russia, or a vaccine, so if Russia wants to put out misinformation about vaccines don't work, some people might believe it, whereas this is kind of about freedom and fundamental values that we hold in the West.
Okay, so first, I think first impressions matter. And here we are not in a fair informational debate, we're in a propaganda warfare by every party engaged. Unfortunately, we got to it. And Russia has worked for years now, forcing kind of the civilized world to abandon this more measured approach. In fact, it has found a way to, measure, to hijack it when there's always a reasonable doubt and we need to look at this. So this is Russia exploits it and says, listen, there's another point to the story, and in the end you're confused. It's very indecisive. So the US has done something unusual. It started leaking intelligence since the beginning of November. They, like, on Washington Post, reported the potential invasion on October 30th, I think. And so that's new. And I think there's, I talked to some of the diplomats and they apologize that they've been doing it, but they say there's a law, or maybe there's internal documents post I think some of the Iraq and post of Afghanistan. There are some requirements that they have to announce publicly some of the classified info, so that they cannot be accused later that they held something out from the allies and from the world. And I don't know what to do, but that's that's what I've been told privately when I was asking, what guys are you doing with the markets? I didn't believe there would be a war, because in my view, there were two types of analysts. There was type like me, who said, Ukraine will resist, and it would be ridiculously stupid for Russia to attack, therefore they should not attack. So I was wrong. But then there was the other type of analysts, and they were mostly in Pentagon, saying that Ukraine will fall immediately, and therefore Russia will attack. So both sides were wrong. But we had these debates with them saying, why guys are you leaking this info? They're not going to attack you, underestimating us. You're just destroying our economy because everyone is pulling out. This information warfare, and you're damaging us. Okay, so but the US set up the context, the plausible context, and so when Russia attacked, it was, I told you so. We had been saying this since October. Now in March, in February, you see they're really doing it, and basically everything, they kind of preempted everything. And somehow it works in political conversation. I use this trick in TV shows, in debates, where I study my opponent and I come to a TV debate and I tell the opponent and to the audience what the opponent is going to do. Say, you're going to use this trick to manipulate me, and you're going to use this. So I call them out before the hand. That works, I usually get 15, 20 minutes when the opponent cannot find a way, because I just called all the tricks. And when they do it, I said, this is the trick number 3 that I said you're going to do it. Now you're doing it, and this discredits the person. So the US has been saying for a long time, Russia will invade. When Russia did something, Russia, even if Russia didn't do anything, even if they did 2014 and there were some protests, manufactured protests, then people would say, yeah, this is Russia invading. So they created the context. So I think Russia, the US played a large role in this information warfare. And then it is also true, at least what I've heard, it's true that I have heard, that I've been told, that the US and the international community pressured Zelensky to evacuate and even leave the country. And that famous story that, I don't need an evacuation, I need arms, I don't need a helicopter, I need, an evacuation helicopter, I need an attack helicopter. That is true, that he refused to be evacuated. And so I think that actually made the point, that's leadership. And it's also a very good narrative. And I think Russia is just using the same playbook. And in the modern world, you have to innovate constantly. And Zelensky is very good at innovating. Look at him. So to understand Zelensky, I think the most useful book for me was Save the Cat by Snyder. It's how to sell a script to Hollywood. It's about drama writing, how to write a drama script. And so it's really, he does the whole like roller coaster of emotions. So look at this Bucha massacre. They didn't announce the Bucha massacre, even though they knew it. They said the first 2 days they said, we liberated, Russians gave up, and everyone was up, everyone was super happy about this, and great things were happening, and everyone was, yes, finally, we can root for Ukrainians. Ukrainians are winning back. And 2 days later, bad news are coming. And then good news, we're doing reconstruction, we're recovering, so there's always up and down, and they're very good at this. They keep us engaging. It's like a series of episodes which are exciting. The war in Ukraine is politically, geopolitically, and communication-wise is exciting. It doesn't get old. It's always something new. And so I think both sides, and Putin just cannot keep up with that. He's doing the old thing. You can trust anything. The story it's not so clear. There's a other side. People, it's a civil war. We didn't do that. We did that. They are bad. It's just not exciting. No one's gonna pay $10 or $20 to watch a movie like that. Everyone is willing to watch a movie that Zelensky is describing. They're attacking Snake Island. Why the heck? It's intrigue, it's drama, a helicopter was shut down. Was it Ukrainian? Was it Russian? All analysts have 3 days of work to do. Everyone is reporting that there's some new, something is happening all the time. So it's a drama. It's really a classic drama. It's Hollywood style drama. That's why this war is televised. It's maybe the first war which is televised.
Dorothea, you have a question.
Yeah, so I think the conclusion here is, I think it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you control the narrative, you win. Because in the critical moment, you can shift the support and mobilize. And so Zelensky is much better at controlling the narrative than Putin.
Okay. Olivia Vissa.
Hi, I just have a question about misinformation and trying to figure out the best sources of information. You said that you right now only trust experience, the experience of yourself and the experience of others above things like data, which can make it difficult for people outside of Europe to figure out what's true. So would you, is there anything that you think is important for us to focus on as people who are abroad in this war?
In terms of how to understand what's happening, yeah, I think it's I don't know. I can say read the reports of the Kyiv School of Economics, of course, but that's just because you know me and we can connect through the cultural shared code of me being an academic, so I kind of use the same frameworks. I would say find a friend and talk to so the data is okay to use. You just need to understand the context to interpret it rightly. So the key, I guess, is to find a friend or someone who is in Ukraine or has been in Ukraine or knows someone from Ukraine who can help you interpret and understand the context. on the issues you are. So, and once you understand the context, it's a little bit like going to a PhD. In principle, you can study Mescal and Winston Green, individually, do the math, study it. But unless you go in and discuss and do the problem sets and, kind of make mistakes and in interpretation and talk to people about this, you probably won't be very successful. So the same is here. Just find someone who you trust and who has enough information and discuss things with him or her. And after that, you just read the news. So basically get the context and interpretation right.
So Dorothea has typed the question that she wanted to ask, and so I'll read it. There is a famous saying, the first casualty in war is truth. I'm wondering how individuals go about figuring out what the truth is and to what extent they believe their own government. There's been a fair amount of reporting in the West about Russian propaganda, control of the media, and how many Russians believe it.
So I think Russians believe their propaganda, and and Ukrainians believe our own Ukrainian propaganda, and it's a warfare. It's informational warfare. Propaganda is a warfare too. So I think it's important to be clear on the questions you want to know answers to. If you really discipline yourself about the questions you want to get the answer to, then the propaganda approach is not very effective. But if you kind of let yourself be confused and sort of be a recipient of the information, kind of an actor in this game, you're not a scenarist, you're not writing the script, you're on the receiving side, saying, I'm in a theater, I'm sitting in a theater, and how can I figure out what's the true intention of the writer was, of the actor was? Well, if they're good actors and writers, you won't be able to do that. And that's the point. They create a false reality for you, So the war today, the modern warfare is also informational warfare, and it's mobilizing support for the countries and for people. And so if it's being done well, you will not know that it's being done. You subscribe to that. You make a choice, it's a preference, you support Ukraine or you support Russia. In many ways, it's a preference. But if you want to ask specific questions, a specific question could be, who started the war? Very difficult for Ukrainian or Russian propaganda to change the answer is if you keep focusing on it. So propaganda is about distracting attention. It's about attention management. It's not about it's documented that on February 24th, around 4 or 5 a.m., there is satellite evidence, there is thermal imaging evidence, there is video evidence that Russia has bombarded multiple cities in Ukraine. And there's video evidence that Russian troops entered from Russia and from Belarus. And there are eyewitness accounts, there are interviews, and there are all kinds of. So if you ask this question, it's clear who started the war. And, so I think you start asking questions, can Russia win? The answer is yes, if the West stops supporting Ukraine. If you ask the question, are there atrocities in Bucha? Are there war crimes? The answer is yes. There are multiple eyewitness accounts. You ask the question, does Ukraine, do Ukrainian troops do bad things, and are there occasional war crimes? Yes. The answer is yes. Do Ukrainian troops get prosecuted for that? The answer is yes. So, if someone does things which are violent, they get prosecuted. So, if you have specific questions, I think to kind of fight, if you don't, then Russian propaganda or Ukrainian propaganda will be able to confuse you. Because it will say, Russians commit crimes, oh well, Ukrainians also commit crimes, oh well, this is the war, everyone is fighting, Russian, it's a mess, let's stop the war, or something like that. Let's just agree not to fight anymore, and or something else, you know, or the West should not be supporting, because if they provide weapons, then of course, you know, Russia, Ukraine will fight more, and or you know, whatever, right? Or Ukraine will try to say we are winning. Yeah, we're not often winning. So in some areas we are losing, you know, or we claim that we don't have casualties. We have casualties, we're just not reporting them, right? But the moment you ask this question, do you think Ukrainians have casualties, and how many of them? Yes, of course, a lot. Probably comparable with what Russia has in military, right? Why should it be any different? So I think the way to fight the propaganda is to be very clear about the questions you're asking yourself.
Nick Schmidt has a question.
Yes, thank you. A fairly narrow questions about trade. The EU has announced that it would temporarily lift tariff for import from Ukraine. Canada has announced the same thing on Sunday. The US has announced the same thing, but for steel. Could you assess this for me? Is it significant? Is it just symbolic? What can Ukraine export at the moment? Put this into context for me.
So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars positive impact for Ukraine, GDP or value added, not billions of dollars. So the US recently announced that the metallurgy metal tariffs are going to be, or quotas are going to be lifted. But not all, but some of our plants, at least 2 out of 4, they have been destroyed. Azovstal and Ilyicha and Mariupol. There's some in Zaporizhia, there's some in Dnipro, there's some in Kryvyi Rih. Those are substantial. And so are they exporting not through Odessa, but through the west of Ukraine, through railroad? Is it more expensive? Yes, but will compensate that, are we exporting to the US? Yes, we are, even now. The same with agriculture, with trade. So these things are, of course, symbolic politically. They're very important because they form expectations and then somewhat irrationally anchor the investments too. But fundamentally, if we don't unblock Odessa, the impact is going to be limited, okay?
All right, thanks.
Luba has a question.
I'd like to talk a bit about back in 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea, they appropriated the Ukrainian offshore gas operations. I wanted to just ask, from your point of view, how strategically important was that? Has it had much impact on Ukraine subsequently? And is it important to get that, that gas operation back?
To me, it's a theoretical question, how important it is to get it back, because I don't see it's happening in the short run at all. So I don't think it's possible to get it back for quite a while. And it's just an example. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. Also, I wonder, I mean, was that production at all an important or relevant threat to Russia's ability to sell gas and or oil to the West?
No, that's not a threat because Ukraine is a net importer and it would continue to be a net importer even if Ukraine was successful at exploration there. That's my understanding. I think, right, but I'm hesitant because I want to change an angle on this. It's just one element of the Russian strategy to undermine Ukraine exploration and increasing supply of gas and oil in Ukraine. To continue to keep Ukraine dependent on gas and oil from Belarus and Russia, Ukraine has taken steps to become at least politically less leveraged by importing gas from Slovakia. However, I've seen, other elements where we have been not very successful because presumably of quote unquote domestic politics. In exploration on the ground in Poltava, we could have been exploring more there. So we have been unable to increase supplies, even in the areas which have not been captured by Russia. And I wouldn't rule out the Russian hand in this, kind of creating additional bidders, creating, bribing and buying out politicians, sabotaging deregulation and doing other things, So in that sense, I think Russia's strategy overall has been extremely consistent in undermining supply in Europe or overall in Ukraine as well, So Germany shutting down nuclear plants with an argument that it's green or something else, it's great, but substituting it for gas coming from Russia, which is not green at all, using a very old technology, it just doesn't add up. And getting politicians on boards to Gazprom or elsewhere. So, Russia has been doing things, and providing discounts to Hungary and Slovakia and other countries to suppress their incentives for diversification or energy efficiency. So, I think it has been a very systemic approach, and it's just one element of that.
Simon has a question.
Thanks. There's been quite a lot of speculation in the Western media about Putin's objectives and what they might be, or whether he even has clear objectives at this point. I'm kind of curious your thoughts about that, what he might be trying to achieve and what that tells us about what might happen next and how the war might end.
I think it's in many ways simple, it's just we don't want to believe that that's his objectives. Because what he's doing is not very different what he has been doing in Georgia and Syria, in Ukraine in 2014, and now in Ukraine in 2022. He's collecting lands. So it's actually very simple. He's trying to increase the influence through geography. He's putting hotspots, in Moldova, in Transnistria, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Syria, and elsewhere, right? So he's creating points of leverage, and he's trying to connect these dots and get. His objective is clearly not prosperity, because he's destroying the areas that they are occupying. It's just extremely costly. It will be they controlled Mariupol. Okay, fine. If they're gonna comply, why did they destroy it? They could have surrounded and wait for 5 months. So, no, they decided to kind of level it. Presumably, that's going to be their territory. It just makes no sense. So they really they are for square kilometers, I think, in a very simple way. But I think they're also they're trying to make a point to surrounding countries that you have to surrender or be destroyed. I think that's a broader objective. So I think in the war in Ukraine, they don't have strategic military objectives. They are not showing their military as a strategic power. They are not, kind of protecting their troops or training their troops. They're not testing new strategies. They have some tactical objectives, like to take Kyiv, but but it's not military. They're not attacking military. They're not sending special ops to achieve specific goals. They're basically, I think, pursuing a different objective. The objective is you surrender or we destroy you, and we do unspeakable things to both civilian population and military population. So we're gonna kill prisoners of war, something like that. And I think their message to the civilians is coming, because there's a lot of examples where there were atrocities, and places which resisted. And, people are being punished for supporting resistance, for supporting Ukrainian military. If you don't, if it's very limited, like in Melitopol and Kherson and Berdyansk, then cities don't get destroyed. They just arrest and kill the leadership, but that's it. But if you really have a lot of resistance and people are fighting tooth and nail, and there's guerrilla warfare, they're gonna kill everyone. You know, and that's what happened north of Kyiv. So I think they're teaching the lesson, maybe not even Ukrainians, they're probably teaching a lesson to Kazakhs and Belarusians and Georgians and Armenians and everyone, you know, surrender or be destroyed. This time they have been unable to teach the Ukrainian military. So far, the Ukrainian military has not had yet an episode where they have been surrounded and killed. And even in Azovstal, Zelensky has been extremely, it's like a masterpiece how he managed not to make Mariupol a focal point for a victory for Putin. It's really unbelievable because Mariupol was supposed to be a victory. You know, we took the town, we destroyed it, we won. And Zelensky managed to create a narrative around it that Russia doesn't want to claim victory there because it's a lot of, you know, it's there's this maternity ward, there's Azovstal, there are all these humanitarian corridors with evacuation of civilians, and Russia sabotaged that. So there are all these filtration camps and Red Cross stories, and you know, you can't claim a clear victory. So far, Russia has been unable to claim a clear victory even through brutality. And I think they need that. And that's what they've been doing in 2014 and 2008. They would surround an area, they would kill everyone, and they would say, you know, listen, you guys have to give up or we'll kill everyone. And I think that's the objective rather than why? Because my view is that they are running the concept of pseudo-sovereignty. The concept of pseudo-sovereignty is something which is happening in Belarus. You can have your sovereignty, but you don't control your foreign policy, you don't control your military, and you don't control your domestic policing. Everything else is up to you. And Ukraine refused to submit to that after Yanukovych. In 2014, that's when we ousted Yanukovych. It's when Yanukovych was told that you have to dissociate from the EU, and that's when all this mess started. Crimea and the east of Ukraine and the revolution of dignity, it's because Yanukovych said, oh, you know, I'm gonna go and do what Putin said, I'm gonna step out, you know, I'm gonna exit the negotiations on the EU association agreement, and then people protested and he didn't want to suppress the protests. And so Russia intervened with Crimea and the east of Ukraine. And I think that's the moment in 2014 where Ukraine abandoned the notion of pseudo-sovereignty. And we are being punished as a satellite republic that we don't submit to the notion of pseudo-sovereignty. I think it is about pseudo-sovereignty, in my view.
Anka has a question.
Sorry, just to I think the real question for all of us is whether if Putin is successful in Ukraine, would he extend the notion of pseudo-sovereignty to Poland or to Baltic countries? Yes. And my thinking is yes. I don't see any reason why not. Because he's not thinking in terms of NATO or anything like that, or sovereignty. He's thinking in terms of, you know, Warsaw Pact or something, you know, and there has been a clear language. There have been threats to Finland and Sweden not to join NATO. There have been discussions to bring NATO back prior to 1996 and so on and so forth. He's thinking of this as his territory. So he'll be expanding his notion of pseudo-sovereignty.
Anka has a question.
Sorry, I'm muted. Okay, sorry. Timothy, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
Greetings from Bonn, actually.
Yes, that's correct.
I had a couple of people who told me that I should say hi to you. I have a question. I don't know if you saw it. There was actually an op-ed from Jeffrey Sachs today in the Project Syndicate, and he was arguing that Ukraine should get back to the negotiating table. Essentially, he was arguing that because of, you know, there's a war of attrition, everybody loses in a war of attrition. Also, there's this impeding threat of nuclear, you know, some nuclear, you know, issue that's coming
nuclear
up,
war,
escalation. And then I guess on top of that, maybe also because now that you have the the U.S. elections looming, there might be a weakening of the support of Ukraine, or at least an anticipated weakening. So, and in light of what you just said about the objectives of what you think that Putin is pursuing here, what's your sense about, should Ukraine go back to the negotiating table and settle for some kind of agreement based on neutrality and some agreement on Crimea and other regions, or is that something that's really not in the cards, that you should try to avoid as a country?
Yeah, so I think that would be a mistake to take what Jeff says at good faith, at the face value. So there are several mistakes there. One is that Russia will negotiate in good faith. We actually, unfortunately, we have tried, and everything we have agreed upon was either had a Trojan horse in it, or they regrouped and counterattacked. Do you want me to start talking about Budapest Memorandum? Where we gave up nuclear weapons and 4 countries agreed, including Russia, to guarantee our sovereignty. Or every other agreement after that, like the Kharkiv agreement that we extend the base for the Black Fleet in Crimea, which they were later used simply as they actually brought troops to under Kharkiv agreement to Crimea to take over Crimea. So, or we can talk about Minsk II or Minsk I, both were signed under duress, which is fine. Well, not very fine, but okay. And the agreement asks us to elect members of parliament, which will then have procedural de facto right to block the processes through amendments in our legislative process in the national parliament before Russia gives up military control over the region. So basically elect their representatives. So every agreement we have signed with them has been used against us to kind of give up the sovereignty. Now, I think Jeff's kind of makes a mistake of thinking the players at the table are exogenously given. It's like he assumes that we will always have to negotiate with Putin. And well, we don't want, it's better for the world to negotiate with someone who will be after Putin. And maybe we have to start offering opportunities and negotiating with those people. So I think Ukraine is very happily, we're happy to sit down and negotiate with people who are willing to oust Putin or are likely to be successors, or, and that, strategically speaking, might be even a better solution than negotiate right now with Putin about, so there's a choice who to negotiate with. So we need to discuss that too. Then on the story of nuclear threats, first of all, Putin has a history of, you look at the headlines, Google them up, every time, so I think the earliest I've seen was in 2008 when Putin said something. If you don't do something, I don't remember what it was, something about the pipelines. If you don't allow us to build something, we might even resort to nuclear or something like that, So, but in practice, what we have seen is 2 things. One is his use of major force with respect to the West is actually decreasing over time. The last time he switched off gas to Europe was in 2004 during the Orange Revolution, which was very minor. He didn't like that the candidate Yushchenko was elected, not Yanukovych. There's no revolution, there was nothing, no hostilities on the street, no one was shooting anyone. And that's when he really cut off gas to Europe for supporting Yushchenko, not supporting Yanukovych. And he has not dared to do that ever since, because what it caused him what it caused him is that it caused a 5-year delay in building Nord Stream 2. And so probably had that not been made, then the gas not cut off, then we would have been in a much more difficult situation. So he lost there, and it was strategically a mistake. Then the other example, he threatened recently and said that convoys of military to Ukraine are a fair target but they didn't attack. They have not attacked. And fundamentally, I think what he's doing, he's trying militarily to test the areas where there will be no resistance. Why should he test something where there will be resistance? So in that sense, I think he understands force, unfortunately, for all of us. And this is really bad, but the conflict will be worked out on the ground, unfortunately for us all. I've spoken with Jeff about this, and Jeff has the idea that Russia is misunderstood, and if in late 90s, early 2000s, Russia was given as much support from the West as Poland, for example, was given, then the world would have been different, and so the world would have had been nasty to Russia. It is true, but it still doesn't. Even if it's true, it doesn't justify killing civilians and raping people, starving kids, all of that. It just has no, it's no excuse. So I just don't see any evidence that any of the agreement is going to be enforceable or negotiation proof if we want to talk strategy. So if I accept Jeff's framework, then we have to negotiate in such a way that we don't need to renegotiate immediately after that. But so that means we need to have some stable outcome. What that stable outcome could be if Russia cannot commit to anything and couldn't commit to the previous agreements and escalate it every time. So, we should continue to negotiate, of course, and we try, but I don't think that they have a real commitment problem in Russia. And until they demonstrate that they can commit to something, those negotiations are futile. So, if again, I'm being a game theorist here, I think we should start small and we can try to negotiate something and then see if everyone sticks to that. And we have tried on humanitarian corridors and didn't work very well, right? We have tried on evacuation of civilians, didn't work very well. We have tried on providing supplies and water and food to besieged areas, didn't work very well. So the very same framework Jeff is suggesting would require that, there's some evidence on, we'll find a way to negotiate on something and parties stick to it. So I'm yet to see what that might be. So we should be seeking for it, looking for it, seeking it, but I don't know what it might be at this point, unfortunately. So I'm being attacked by Ukrainian mosquitoes and they're also nasty. Yeah.
This is a pretty black picture you're painting of the future, Timothy. I mean, yeah, you have a pretty pessimistic view of the future of what a peace could possibly look like.
No, there won't be peace. There will be a hybrid warfare where we will have to militarize and kind of, the world might not have noticed, but we have been in war since 2014. It has not stopped, and we have functioned. And we need to, we need to wait for Russia to implode. I think there was a question earlier, but I didn't, kind of address that aspect. So I think when Russia implodes, the risk is not going to be over. When Putin is removed, because he will die at some point or someone will assassinate him, the risk will not be over. I think and also our kind of diplomatic frameworks that we have for negotiations, that we have established after World War II, they have failed. They're not functional. They're dysfunctional. They have been unable to stop a major war in Europe or close to Europe, on the EU borders. So those frameworks, the only time, well, it's not the first time, there's Yugoslavia, but it's the second time, and they have failed. So something is wrong with the security infrastructure. And it's because the security infrastructure assumes a discreteness, kind of Article 5 of NATO says there would be an attack. Russia doesn't declare wars anymore, it doesn't declare attacks. You have to prove it. So and then you have unanimity. So you have all kinds of issues. and these frameworks are outdated. The warfare and the threats and escalations will continue to be hybrid. And we need to find a way to, as Gorodnichenko put it, we have to find a way to commit to escalate in order to create incentives to de-escalate. So it would be much more efficient to commit to escalate to Russia, truly escalate, if they do more, so that they will actually have incentives not to escalate. That will, against that, with that background, you can negotiate, of course. You have to have a punishment on Russia if they renege. So create a commitment to escalation if they renege, and then we are ready to negotiate.
Are there any other questions?
Just a quick one, if nobody else has a question. I was just wondering about what's the feeling inside Ukraine about China in all this? Because before the war, it seemed like Ukraine had decent relations with China. Right now, I don't know, or maybe it's just completely out of mind. Like, you know, they're not relevant for now and we're in a war, so we're not even thinking.
Well, yeah, so we were hoping that China would not enable Russia in this conflict, and it appeared, and we were worried it would. There's a love-hate relationship or expectations, and it appears that China continues to hold neutrality. Okay, it kind of plays both sides a little bit, but it has not been a major enabler for Russia. So in that sense, I know China has been trying to get to the table. I think the Chinese position, because we talked to some government, it's very behind the doors kind of discussion. The Chinese position is we want to sit at the table. And the Western position is, of course, they should sit at the table, but not at the free world table. And so my impression is the Chinese government, would want to have some kind of something from the West in terms of agency, actually, and leverage. And they would be able to then put leverage on Russia. China is a pivotal player in this conflict. But they want to get something from the West that the West is not willing to give them. So they will be waiting for the West to mess it up and for Ukraine to mess it up. But the problem again is that it's unlikely to happen, Ukraine will be there. Ukraine is close to Europe geographically. It's bordering with the countries which are committed to help Ukraine because they are next in line. Those countries will put pressure on other European countries. The US will chip in. And there is a comment that, there is uncertainty about, but historically Republicans have been more supportive of Ukraine in votes. Maybe not necessarily Trump in rhetoric, but in practice, Republicans have been much more supportive when it comes to votes. It's easier to get votes from Republicans and from Democrats. They are hawks when it comes to Ukraine. I don't know why. But Democrats are, I think we like bipartisan support, and I don't think there will be much of a difference. There will be, of course, a transition period. But we have seen a transition period. Biden administration was absent from Ukraine for months since the inauguration. So I think we're not too worried that there will be some issues and lack of commitment from the US. We actually don't think so. The US will continue to be committed. China eventually will abuse Russia, I think, in this conflict. Use and abuse to its benefit. So Russia is screwed because it's going to be dependent either on China or will have to negotiate with Ukraine and the West in some form. So Russia in the longer run has lost a lot of agency, unfortunately for the Russian people. And Ukraine has gained a lot of agency, but the price is huge. But I guess this is the price if you want to be an independent nation from an imperialistic neighbor.
All right. Timothy, thank you very much for doing this. It was very nice to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and sorry I did not make it last time. I thank you for your patience and support. Yeah, thank you so much.